Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Sri Vishwanath, and I'm the Atlassian's Chief Technology Officer. I oversee our engineering, security, and IT organizations. I am thrilled to be here with you, kicking off our second Team SecCon. Our theme today is Getting Started in Cloud Security. We have designed this event to focus on three themes. Number one, how to incorporate cloud security practices at scale. Number two, how to educate and upskill your team in cloud security. And number three, how to see around the corner to address cloud security challenges and cyber attacks. Later in the program, you'll hear from brilliant speakers from OSCyber, Privasec, and Netflix on our panel. Our keynote address is being delivered by our own Adrian Ludwig, Atlassian's Chief Trust Officer. You're in for a real treat. From web to mobile to cloud security, Adrian has held many roles in this space, and it has helped him to become the expert he is today. He'll share more about his best takeaways and learnings along the way. In recent years, cloud products have enabled teams to collaborate, innovate more effectively, and scale quickly, and focus more time and energy on core mission. But the cornerstone of any cloud application or security or service is security. I frequently look back to a particular moment in our recent history, which became a defining moment in our cloud security journey. 5-alarm fire. It involved declaring a 5-alarm fire, which ended up being the best thing for our security and reliability practice. To set a scene, let's rewind back to 2019. We had just completed our largest migration challenge as a company. We had called it Project Vertigo because we joked just the thought of its complexity and scale would induce dizziness and vertigo in us. During this project, we moved all our Jira and Confluence customers from a single tenanted architecture to a multi-tenanted architecture using microservices on AWS. To complete this migration, we had to pause product development at various times to focus on moving to cloud. Soon after completing this project, we had to immediately accelerate product feature development to meet the pent-up demand. This led to unintended complexity in our code bases. It incurred technical debt and monitoring and reporting practices that weren't as in-depth and where it needed to be. So we declared a 5-alarm fire across the whole company and paused all development for a month in order for everyone to set the right bar and reset ourselves. We had to course correct to ensure that we prioritize security and reliability, changing our practices and rotating them to become bottoms up. As a result, security and reliability became the job of everyone in my organization, not just the security team. After we implemented these practices and culture changes, any team could call a 2-alarm fire or a 3-alarm fire to fix security and reliability. We call this the X-alarm fire program. Since implementing these changes in 2019, teams have been course correcting themselves and making our products and environment more secure for our employees and our customers. What we learned is that in order for cloud investment to be successful, security has to be in the forefront of all our innovation development. That's why security at Atlassian is #1 priority. This moment accelerated our evolution of our security and reliability practices into a world-class program we have today. And we can't wait to share all that we have learned with you. You can check our full story on our engineering blog in the coming weeks. In the meantime, we have so much to share today. Be sure to tune in throughout the day to deep dive into cloud security. If you aren't able to join us for live talks, check back for panel conversation on replay. Now, I'll turn it over to Alicia Mittal one of our ecosystem security engineers here at Atlassian. Everyone benefits when teams prioritize safety of their customers and users. So please take notes and use what you have learned today. Alicia, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sri, for that fantastic introduction and sharing more about Atlassian's cloud journey through the cloud migration project, Project Vertigo, and the X-Alarm Fire program. My name is Alicia, and we are so excited to be able to present to you Team SecCon 2021, Atlassian's second annual security conference. Today's forecast is for high cloud security, but with no feelings of vertigo, because in our conference spirit of connecting security to people, this year's theme is getting started in cloud security. We aim to continue making security accessible to any and all communities. So we hope that this experience yields insight into what it's like getting started in security from either a personal or industry perspective, and leaves you with thoughts for what you would like to pursue next. Before we begin, we'd like to draw attention to the live transcription option located at the bottom of your Zoom webinar screen. You can turn on live captions for an optimized viewing experience with this option. We'd also like to introduce the Slack Workspace, which you can join through tinyurl.com/TSC Slack. This link is also shared in the webinar chat right now for you and through your email registration. We will be using this workspace to interact with you throughout the entirety of the conference, and the general landing page there is the one-stop shop for all conference activities today. It has quick links to all the resources for Team SecCon, including the agenda, conversations with Atlassian careers, any audience activities such as your conference gift, as well as our Q&A activities for our talks today. By joining the Slack, you can ask and upvote questions and see them get answered live during the conference for our talks. And while the questions won't be answered live for the panel, there will also be a thread for interacting with today's panelists. Additionally, our lightning talks and panel will be illustrated live by Ashton from Mind's Eye Creative. If you were to see this in real time, please set your webinar to gallery view if it isn't already. This will assure you can see both the talk and the drawing happening on your screen. Our CTF is now underway as well for the next 24 hours. CTF stands for Capture the Flag Challenge. It is suited for all levels, and live help will be available on Slack to make sure your experience is as smooth as possible. Reach out and help CTF for any hints or advice from our CTF team, or about what to expect if this is your first CTF. So if you're interested in participating, head on over to the workspace now or after the conference to learn more and see what kind of challenges and prizes are lined up for participating. If you would like to revisit any of that information, it is also all in the Slack workspace on that general landing page. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our next segment, our keynote speaker, Adrian, Chief Trust Officer at Atlassian, who will also be doing a live Q&A with our conference moderator for today, Lee Berg. Follow along in Adrian's thread located in #conference-discussion on the channel in Slack. Adrian, I'll now pass it off to you to start our first talk for the conference today.
All right, I'll give it my best shot. Thank you very much, Alicia. And thank you to Sri for giving us a bit of an introduction as well. There's gonna be a lot of technical talks throughout the conference today. So I'm not gonna talk about technology very much at all. And to be honest, even though Sri said I was an expert, I feel often a little bit underqualified when it comes to cloud security, but we'll get to that a bit more as we walk through this today. My intro to security was kind of an accident. And so what I want to do is talk a little bit about the various jobs that I've had, some of the experiences that I've had throughout my career, and how it is that those have, I think, helped make me better at cloud security, but also given me the ability to sort of navigate through security more generally. Initially, I started off in physics. I was confident that I was going to become a college professor, or maybe a high school teacher in physics, but I also wanted to pay for college. And so I found a scholarship. It happened to be for a government agency that now most people have heard of, given Edward Snowden and a few others, the National Security Agency. And they said, as long as I was willing to work in math and get a degree in math, that they would pay for college. To me, that sounded awesome. because I had no idea what I was going to do to pay for college. So the fact that somebody was willing to do it, as long as I did something close to what I was interested in, seemed good enough. It wasn't that I loved security. It wasn't that it was a passion. It never really has been. It was simply a matter of I needed to pay the bills, starting with how I was going to pay for college. And so they paid for it. I learned a little bit about security. They dropped me into a program to be a cryptographer. I quickly realized that the people around me were actually professional cryptographers. They had PhDs in statistics or PhDs in ring theory and mathematics. So were so beyond my head that there was no way that I was going to be able to not compete with them, but even add a whole lot of value in the environment that they were in. But I was within a large organization that had a big challenge, like how do we make the world a more secure place? And so I poked around a bit until I found something that I at least could contribute a little bit, which was operating system security. It was a burgeoning field. This was the mid-90s, and consumer operating systems and using commercial off-the-shelf software was something new for the government. And so we were starting to do things like look at Windows 95 and Internet Explorer and think about how we would secure those platforms, and also think about what we could do on the operational side. There were people using those technologies that we wanted to know data that they had. We wanted to have information from them. And so I started building tools to help poke holes. I started writing exploits. I became pretty competent at writing x86 assembler in extraordinarily small spaces that happened to be just beyond the end of a buffer. But throughout all of this, I found it interesting, but I never really was passionate about it. And so that for me was what was pretty compelling, is that I was able to make a career over several years doing stuff that I thought was interesting, playing with these problems, but never being in love with it. And now I think in hindsight, it was important for me to not feel like I had to love it. I think a lot of times at this point, especially in the security space, there's so many people that give the impression of it being the one thing that they've always wanted to do, that they've been thinking about since they were a kid, that can be really intimidating. And so I kind of wanted to start by pointing out that that's not where it started for me. For me, it was always very practical. And so that was my first lesson, right? Is that as long as you're working on something that's interesting, it's okay if it's not your one true love, right? It doesn't have to be a calling. From NSA, I continued my journey through security. I went to a company called Atstake, filled with tons of smart people. And it turns out that I could hang with them as well. We went into companies, Microsoft, Intuit, Adobe, a whole bunch of the different companies at the time. And we found bugs. It was pretty straightforward work. People were talking about security. There's the famous Microsoft worms that basically led to the takedown of most of the internet on several different occasions. There's the Bill Gates memo, where we had Bill Gates saying the number one thing that we can work on is security, and if we don't work on that, the company is going to end. Similar in many ways to what Shri just talked about at the 5-alarm fire work that we did here at Atlassian. But even though there was that much level of attention being posed on security, people didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to build out security. There were guides that had been provided by, say, the federal government, but those were so heavy-handed and so unrealistic in the context of commercial software development that nobody even took them seriously. And so here we were getting pulled in to provide security reviews, being considered experts. And yet a lot of what we would do is, I remember one project where I just ran grep across a code base. Grep for stir copy, grep for stir cat. Every time we found that there was a buffer overflow, and then we said, don't do that. At one project, we did a straight up grep for bug, because it turned out the developers who were writing individual things knew that they had bugs, and they flagged it as such. And all we had to do in order to help them was point out that they had already identified where their security problems were and that they needed to go back and fix them. But this sort of blew the mind of management. And so here we were, being heralded as experts that were being brought in to do security, but there are people within the organization kind of already knew how to do it. They just hadn't spent the time to take those actions. So that was the sort of second thing that I learned, was not only did you not need to be passionate, but you didn't even really need to be that much of an expert. You might be treated as an expert just because you know a little bit. And so when you're thinking about potentially moving into cloud security, if you're not in that space already, if you know a little bit, you probably know enough to be dangerous. Don't let it go to your head. Don't assume that you know exactly what you need to do, but don't fall for imposter syndrome, right? And the belief that the people around you are both more passionate about it and have greater expertise than you do. It's simply not true most of the time. If you do your best and acknowledge the limits on what you do know, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to lead to just about the most best possible outcome that's out there. Moving from at stake, I realized that doing these projects where I would run grep and find a vulnerability after vulnerability after vulnerability, or where we'd run pen tests and we would run Nessus or Netcat and find vulnerability after vulnerability, it was just depressing. And so I decided that what I wanted to do is go work on the defensive side. And clearly, the reason that these vulnerabilities existed is because people didn't understand the technology. And if we just got inside the door, we could fix it, right? So naively, I went to a company called Macromedia, makers of Flash, Dreamweaver, a bunch of other technologies that were at the core of the web, and began working on some of the projects they had there. We did a bunch of things that I thought were pretty amazing at the time. We defined the security model, made it as coherent as we possibly could. We documented it. We implemented a secure development lifecycle that involved code review. It involved making sure that we were running scanning tools that were looking for potential vulnerabilities. We wrote security bulletins and published those. We even started publishing monthly security updates, right? So we were sort of at the tip of the spear in terms of driving new practices out there into the industry. And yet now we look at that and we're saying, well, yeah, those are just basic expectations, right? That's what you're supposed to do if you're building that kind of software. Even as we were doing those important things, every single month we had vulnerabilities. And that continues to be true, I think, across the software industry. I hear people say things like, oh, on defense, you need to protect everything. But on offense, you only need to find one flaw and you're going to get through. There was a sense of defeatism throughout the industry that building things in a more secure way was fundamentally impossible. I tried to understand that because I wanted to see if we could make it better. I tried to fight it, but ultimately, two things. One, I quickly began to realize that this wasn't about technology, right? Key lesson for me, number 3, was that on offense, you had a small team and you were looking at a technical thing and you were trying to break that technical thing. But if you were on defense, you have a big team, 1,000 engineers, 2,000 engineers. And you weren't looking at that thing. You were actually working on the organization itself. So security was a technical problem on the offensive side, and it was a people problem and a process problem and a business problem, completely different. And so you had the same issue, but depending on which side of it you were on, the type of issues that you were trying to solve were completely different. And so for me, that was a pretty transformative learning, that the way we're going to solve security from a defensive side is going to require a completely different skill set than the skill set that you use to find holes or to break things. It's about people. It's about understanding their motivation. It's about helping to guide them to do things in a more effective way. That's just not the same as how do you write a buffer overflow. So that was a pretty big learning for me. At the same time, I realized that that's a pretty hard problem. And it's one that I think security continues to struggle with. For me, it was depressing. I decided that security was too hard. And I went off and I did something totally different for a little while. I worked in marketing. So if you're thinking about whether your background has adequately prepared you to be a CISO or to work in cloud security, ask yourself, do you have 5 years doing consumer marketing? I do. And it's a weird skill set, but it does give me some really important lessons as well. One of them was that the basic skill sets of how you manage problems and how you guide people are the same, whether you're working on a technical issue or whether you're working on a marketing type of issue. So I think there's a huge amount of value in being able to deal with those types of things, just organizing people and working with people. And that skill set translates very, very effectively. Some of the most effective people that I know in technology are ones that come from an arts degree or a sociology degree or a psychology degree, and they're able to get their point across. They're able to communicate effectively, and they're able to help drive change and make improvement. The other thing that I learned in the context of marketing was that you can pump thousands of messages out millions of instances on search engine optimization. You could have click streams up the wazoo. No matter how many people have heard your message, if you then go out to the market and you take a subset of your target audience and you ask them whether you've heard it, you'll find out a shocking percentage have not heard the message at all. Or among those that have heard it, they either disagreed with it, rejected it out of hand, or simply don't understand it. And it took being in a marketing organization and doing that and having that analysis, but also realizing what level of funding we were having to realize how hard it is to influence behavior and how hard it is to influence change. So in the context of security, what that means is you might be sitting in a team with 5 other engineers who work on security, having a conversation day in and day out about how important it is that we solve cross-site scripting. You might work on a training program that's been pushed out to your entire company. You might have had every individual in the company take that training program. But if you then go out and ask them, how important is this? Have you taken the training? A lot of them will be like, oh, I don't even, maybe I took that training. I forget. And then you ask, how do you solve the problem? Oh, I don't remember. Now, that's not to say that it's intractable. It's not to say that it's not solvable, but it is to say hitting the message over and over again and continuing to communicate how important these things are, continuing to make sure that you're building tools that are more effective is a core part of being successful. And for me, being comfortable repeating yourself over and over and over again, which can be very boring, which can be very annoying, but it's fundamental to being able to drive change. Right. And so that's an element of both patience and understanding that if you are operating in your own bubble, you're not going to be able to drive the change that you need to drive. From there, I moved to Android. I worked on mobile. Went back into security, which was an interesting transition. I had a friend that called up and said, I think we're going to do it right. We're going to make some fundamental changes in the way the security model works. And we think we'll be able to get out of some of the traps that we fell into in the context of previous operating systems. And that was sufficiently compelling that I went along for the ride. Joined Android when it was a very small team, about 100 people, and stayed with it until it was several thousand. In fact, the Android security team when I left was about 120 people. What was exciting to me about it is it embraced the idea that change was going to happen and that you can use that change to your advantage. I think the Chrome browser has done a spectacular job of emphasizing that the more frequently you change your code base, the better your organization is at delivering updates, the faster you're able to respond to security. And that's sort of a fundamental tenet to how they think about security. And I think it should be fundamental for a lot of organizations. But it also turns out to be something that is critical. Is if you embrace change, then you can turn it into a security strength. And in particular, one of the things that I was really drawn to that was important in Android was identifying those inflection points where once you've made the change, you can't possibly go back. Once we decided that a phone should be encrypted, it's no longer possible for anybody to sell a phone that's not encrypted. It's just like you can't justify it. Now, getting to the point where we were comfortable with performance attributes of it, getting to the point where we were willing to, have some of those expenses associated with having encryption, take on some of that risk. I received emails where I was told if we enable this, it's going to result in people dying, and that's probably true. But at the same time, it enabled people to have a heightened sense of privacy and a heightened level of protection and a number of additional security benefits down the road. But we had to take on some of those costs. But now that that's in place, we will never regress on that. And that's the kind of thing that I'm constantly looking for in the context of cloud security as well. What are the changes that we can make where once we've made them, we will accrue the benefit forever because it's so difficult to unwind those changes? And how can you identify those things and how can you make sure that you incorporate them into your environment? Actually, adoption of cloud turns out to be one of those things. So for enterprises where they're thinking, I'll continue using this on-prem solution or I'll move to cloud, it's a one-way function. Once they move to using cloud and have both the performance benefits and the security benefits and the ease of use benefits, unwinding that and moving back is basically impossible. And so we actually have a huge opportunity with cloud security to make improvements that are simply not going to be possible with the on-prem model that a lot of companies are using now, but that they're moving away from. So That's one of the reasons that I was really excited to come to Atlassian and start working on cloud security, because it's actually a transition that I think is going to be fundamental to the industry as cloud services are adopted. Now, I'm 20 plus years into my career before I used the word cloud security, because I didn't work on cloud security. Cloud didn't exist for the first half of it, maybe first 2/3. And then for quite a while, I wasn't working in that space. And so I think there's a bit of a lesson there as well, which is it's not that important which specific things you know from a technical standpoint. The skills that you have in terms of communication, the skills that you have in terms of thinking about how organizations work, those are the driving principles that are going to make cloud security better. And as long as you have an interest and the ability to begin to influence an organization and try to push that organization to be better, you've got what it is that you need to move into cloud security. You're going to learn a little bit throughout the rest of the day about some of the technical things that we're working on, that other companies in the space are working on. But at the core, as long as you're interested in it and willing to push for making things better, you've got a place in cloud security. I think Lee was going to join me, and we're going to see if we had any questions or things that people wanted to talk about.
That's right, Adrian. Hey, everybody. I am Lee. I'll be popping in throughout the rest of the conference just to do a little bit of QA and keep things rolling. So, Adrian, we have about 1 entire minute before we are scheduled to jump to our next session, but a quick question for you. You talked about a lot of interesting things about your role in, or the things you've done to get started in security. You actually answered a lot of the questions I wanted to ask, but have you dealt with the issue of imposter syndrome as you've gone through your journey? Because this is something I talk to. I know a lot of people struggle with this. Just wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
There was somebody who wrote a really, really nice note. I think it was Ben, saying it's easy on the days when you know the answers to the questions to show up and do a good job. The days where it's hard are where people really, really differentiate. And imposter syndrome falls into that category, right? It's when you have self-doubt or when you aren't sure that you know the answer, and yet you are willing to provide your opinion, willing to provide your feedback, that people really shine. Because the reality is, like, nobody knows. Or rather, very few people know the answer to all of the things that they're asked about. But if you're willing to ask a question and acknowledge, hey, I don't know, but here's what I think, that goes a long way. So yeah, every day. Every day I'm asked for an opinion about something that I know I'm not the expert or an expert, or like, am I an expert in imposter syndrome? God, no. And yet I probably suffer it as much as anybody else. And so you just have to, like, it's not about grit, but it is about trying anyway.
Excellent. No, great. I know it's something I've dealt with, and most people I talk to dealt with, and it's really tough for a lot of, especially newcomers to the field. So it's great to hear your thoughts on that. And with that, Adrian, again, thanks for the session, and appreciate the great answer to the question there. But we are going to roll right along to our next session with Jody. I'm just going to go ahead and start introing Jody now. So Jody is a cybersecurity professional with 7 years experience in cloud security, governance, risk and compliance, strategy, mitigation, and policy. So she's done a lot. She's a senior trust evangelist on Atlassian's trust team in Sydney, Australia, where her primary focus is to remove blockers and security issues with customers so they can become or continue being a customer of Atlassian. Now, prior to joining Atlassian, she came from the realm of the Big Four professional services, where she successfully delivered and uplifted cybersecurity needs to ASX 100 clients. In her free time, you'll find Jody at the gym, salsa socials, being the best auntie to her nieces and nephews, or just cheering on her favorite footy team, the South Sydney Rabbitohs. So Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into Jody's session, Demystifying Myths Around Cloud Security.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jody Blassis, and I'm from Atlassian's Trust, Security and Engagement team here, based in Sydney, Australia. And I'm so excited to be presenting to you all today about demystifying myths when migrating to cloud, questions you and your customers should be asking before you migrate. Whether you're new to cloud security or have been working with your customers for years, this presentation is a great all-rounder for cloud security curious individuals wanting to learn more about the cloud, and also for enthusiasts maybe wanting to learn a different approach or two. Before I continue, the information and advice contained in this presentation is of general application and is not tailored to your individual circumstances. So I would like to start with a question to the audience, and I can't wait to see all your responses. The question is, what does security and trust mean to you? There are so many interpretations about what trust and security mean in this day and age, especially in our industry. But here at Atlassian, we like to take this kind of approach. Adrian Ludwig, who is our Chief Trust Officer, states that trust and security means to us that we will be a leader in cloud security, exceed requirements for all industry standards and certifications, and be proud to publish those details about how we protect customer data. So here at Atlassian, part of my mission within the Trust Security Engagement team is that we remove security blockers and issues with customers so that they can become a customer, continue being a customer, or be a bigger customer of Atlassian. So what does that actually mean? Well, the enterprise migration to cloud has been underway for years, and it has long been a matter of when, not if. But for security-minded enterprises, the more difficult question then becomes, how? Some workflows can be moved to the cloud with very little worry about their security, like messaging, calendars, and so forth. But for more sensitive tasks, such as those that deal with IP or customer data, this will always merit scrutiny from security teams. Most business challenges, large and small, are solved not by individuals, but by teams. And it's been Atlassian's mission to unleash the full potential of every team across organizations of all sorts throughout the world. In recent years, we've witnessed the growth of one of the most significant tools for team collaboration ever developed, the cloud, and we've embraced it wholeheartedly. Our cloud products enable teams to collaborate and innovate more effectively, scale quickly, and focus more time and energy on customers' core missions. The cornerstone of our cloud applications and services is security, and our mission depends on it. So we're committed to ensuring the unfaltering safety and security of customers' data and to provide them with the right information they need to understand and evaluate our security practices and policies for themselves when migrating to cloud. As mentioned, Atlassian is helping more enterprises move critical workflows to the cloud every single day, and we field a wide variety of questions to help them make that process secure. The most common of them are worthy of consideration by any business with cloud aspirations. For example, we see a continuous pattern of customers becoming more inept about data residency, compliance, encryption, and so forth. So our job working in cloud security is to build trust and transparency through security. It's important to discuss how, as a cloud provider, we hear our customers' concerns and what it means for them when they go through their due diligence processes, what blockers and that could potentially stop them from migrating to the cloud. So let's start with the first question. Customers may ask, what is your security philosophy? Mature enterprises understand that ensuring security isn't just a matter of checking a list of requirements. New threats develop more quickly than ever, and reducing the risk of today's security threats requires a holistic approach to security that transcends more than just a security checklist. Organizations moving self-managed workflows to the cloud should look for technology partners with a clear security philosophy that goes well beyond a list of certifications and how transparent they are with their security practices. Another question is, how do you secure your internal environment? One of the most important elements of ensuring that technology is secure is to ensure that the environment in which it is built in is secure itself. Vulnerabilities in the environment create an opportunity for vulnerabilities to end up in the product, which could be an absolute disaster. How do you secure your day-to-day operations? Security should be baked into all aspects of an enterprise technologies provider's day-to-day operational processes. When security practices are incorporated as an afterthought, they're less likely to be adopted. As an example here at Atlassian, we care deeply about the resiliency of our products because we, internally, here at Atlassian, rely on the same products. So we're determined to build in processes to plan for disruptions and handle disruptions that may result in minimal impact to our customers when they do occur. We strive really hard to build security into all aspects of our day-to-day operational processes. We want security in the cloud to be an inherent part of how we do things so that we minimize the need to retrofit or bolster security after the fact. Things like keeping track of our information assets, managing changes and configurations to our environment, having a robust business continuity and disaster recovery program are all things to consider. Without a doubt, customers will always ask, how do you secure customer data? Perhaps more importantly, even than the security of cloud products itself, is the security of the data that cloud products create, contain, or touch. An attack on a product might take that specific tool out of commission for a day or two, but a breach of customer data can create far-reaching ramifications for those customers, which would eventuate in a loss of branding and reputation, and that's not even mentioning legal implications. How do you secure your own workers? No one wants to be the weak link that exposes their organization to a security threat. But sometimes it takes more than good intentions to ensure that the security of the workers who build and support their cloud technology. Enterprise technology providers should have programs in place not only to protect their workers, but to educate them on how they can protect themselves, their colleagues, and their work. Another question customers usually ask is, how do you ensure your applications are built securely? This is the first question many enterprises ask of cloud technology providers. If a technology provider's application is not secure, it's pretty much a no-brainer for most organizations. A secure application requires stringent security measures in the development cycle, as well as frequent maintenance and updates to ensure that the application stays secure as it matures. Another question customers usually ask is, how do you identify and respond to security threats? No matter how thorough and airtight security measures of a technology provider are, there will always be the risk that external forces will test the resiliency that cloud provider has. Enterprises cannot assume their passive security measures will always be effective. They must proactively seek out potential threats and respond quickly to reduce the risk. How do you secure your ecosystem and partners? In today's enterprise technology environments, no technology stack is the same. Just about every piece of software needs to interface with other technologies, and many enterprises prefer to augment their own tools with additional capabilities from the provider's ecosystem. This can introduce significant complexities and create opportunities for threats to arise if a technology provider's ecosystem of developers and partners are not securely integrated. Most importantly, how do you meet compliance obligations? Most enterprises don't just prioritize security for security's sake. They may operate in industries for which regulations compel them to meet security certification requirements. As large-scale security breaches have become more and more common, governments have taken notice of this. Technology providers must have a strong compliance strategy and program if they hope to serve enterprises in regulated industries. These questions should be part of every enterprise processes for assessing the security posture of a cloud provider, and are absolutely worth asking of existing technology partners as well as new ones. And if you're interested in diving deeper into Atlassian's approach to these questions, you can learn more about our current security programs as well as our roadmap for the future at our Atlassian Trust Center. So now I would like to move on to discussing a couple of myths we come across daily and how we've managed to debunk them for our customers and hopefully for you today as well. Again, this is all about providing assurance and building trust through transparency and security. So, which is more expensive, hosting tools on-prem or in the cloud? If you ask a dozen people, you'll most likely get a dozen different answers. While most businesses and organizations tend to treat it as a simple question, it's actually rather a complicated one. But when we look at long-term value, that's where on-prem starts to look less like the conservative choice and more like a consistent drain on organization profits. Why? Using the analogy of an iceberg, the price tag of on-prem is mostly hidden and bigger than you actually might think. Systems downtimes can cost 3 times as much as a year-long cloud subscription in a matter of minutes or hours. And IT's time and resources can be cut in half by moving off-prem and to the cloud. And that's not even factoring in operational expenditures and the cost of over-provisioning resources, which impacts the majority of on-prem companies. In fact, right-sizing your servers by moving to the cloud brings an average annual cost of around 30%. So the real question isn't what's cheaper, it's whether you're taking the long or short-term view. Are you comparing only visible upfront costs, or are you looking at the bigger picture, factoring in the total cost of ownership, everything from IT time to server replacements? When you look past the tip of that iceberg, you'll find a long list of ways that cloud saves you money in the long term. On-prem also comes with a lot of hidden operational and physical costs that simply aren't a factor with cloud. And this includes servers, support, electricity bills, real estate, and so forth. The problem here is that with on-prem hosting, your IT team makes an educated guess about how much computing power you'll need. And if they guess too high, you're paying for those resources. Servers, load balancers, power, you don't really need. But on the other hand, if the team guesses too low, a lengthy, costly manual scaling process is in your future. You'll need to add more servers and more computing power to meet this demand, and that addition will require both money and manpower. An incorrect guess in either direction then can also have major impact on your bottom line. So the solution here is to choose a cloud service with automatic scaling options. When usage spikes, your computing power grows and to meet that demand. And when usage slows down, it scales down to save you money. I would like to share with you an example. Redfin, America's top brokerage site, is on a mission to redefine real estate in the customer's favor. From making every transaction smoother to saving families thousands in fees, their team has built a customer-first company from the ground up. Since Redfin has completed the migration to cloud with Atlassian, they have seen undeniable improvements in their current operations and have even more confidence in their ability to change real estate forever. Saving thousands of dollars within just a few months, and a total cost of ownership has decreased even more when accounting for labor savings. And this is one of many customer success stories that Atlassian is proud to share and hopefully enable you and your customers to consider moving to cloud. So similarly to the first myth, the next myth we often hear about is how teams prioritize security better than vendors. If you make a list of all the things that an IT team has to do to manage your on-prem servers, I can confidently say that that list will get long pretty fast. Performance upgrades, scheduled upgrades, security patches, server replacements, VPN installs, incident management, change management, the list goes on. When you actually shift to the cloud, all those tasks fall on the shoulders of your cloud provider, and they're responsible for upgrading security and maintaining servers, replacing old technology, and regularly updating the software to address feature requests and bugs. This also means that your IT teams are free to focus on strategic or urgent tasks instead of tedious ones. It's also why 74% of organizations say that cloud gives their team a competitive advantage amongst the rest. Ask on-prem businesses why they're hesitant to move to cloud, and their first answer you'll likely get is security. But here's the good news. In a recent survey, 94% of businesses surveyed said that security got better for them after they actually moved to the cloud. The fear around security risks is solidly out of date. So how does the cloud keep you secure as you scale? The answer lies with rigorous testing, disaster recovery plans, encryption in transit and at rest, amongst other best practices. Not to mention that cloud secures systems at the individual user level, not just upon first entry into your systems. This reduces the security risk of a fast-growing team by securing how people log in, who has access to what, and when that access expires. Good cloud systems also take a zero-trust approach to security, which means security checks are at every endpoint for every user in the company. The reason for a zero-trust approach is simple. On-prem servers are typically protected by a company-wide VPN, and if an attacker gets access to that VPN, it's pretty much panic time, and because now they have access to everything. Every system, every tool, all your stored data. Similarly, if every user has access to the same level of security, an attacker only needs to hack one login and it completely wreaks havoc. I would highly recommend sticking around, as our very own Senior Product Security Engineer Florian Ruschel will be presenting more on Atlassian's cloud platform security principles. Overall, moving to cloud will actually free up your IT teams to focus on other initiatives, because we all know time is money. The third myth we often hear is that cloud migrations are not flexible enough to suit an organization's needs. However, contrary to this, it can definitely improve speed and the performance in cloud. There's a pervasive myth that the move itself is just kind of like flipping a switch. But that's an oversimplification, right? The truth is that migrations do take time, and to do them well, you need a migration plan. Migrating your assets to the cloud involves testing, accounting for bandwidth, and allocating the appropriate resources, both internal and external, for the move. And these actions come with timelines that vary widely depending on your organization's size and setup. A small company with a single server and no integrated services can easily make the switch probably in less than a week. But that's the fastest ideal scenario, right? Most companies are dealing with a more complex setup that involves integrated emails, document repositories, and communication systems, and so forth. And the larger and more integrated your systems are, the longer you can expect this migration to take. The industry average is somewhere around 1 to 2 months, with larger companies and complex setups sometimes exceeding 4 months. And that's just the technical side of the process, right? Once your systems have been migrated, it's important to factor in time that it'll take for you to train your employees, secure cultural and team alignment across your new systems, and update any internal documentation to reflect these changes in workflows, processes, and how to complete tasks within your updated systems. The key takeaway here should be that when we talk about cloud increasing speed and saving money, that's the long-term view. There is an upfront cost in both time and budget to get to that more nimble, agile, cost-effective place. And the larger your company, the longer the timeline tends to be. Another example and customer success story that I would like to share with you in support of migrating to cloud is Domino's Pizza. Yes, pizza. Domino's makes it easy for people to satisfy their hunger for delicious pizza. Customers can order from Domino's through their phone apps, Facebook, Twitter, Alexa, and the Domino's website. To ensure a seamless customer experience, no matter the platform, their IT team needed a way to streamline their DevOps processes. Domino's were able to automate a unique workflow and break down barriers between security and development, and creating automation as a key driver for efficiency for Domino's and their customers in today's software-centric world. And lastly, the last myth mentioned is how organizations say keeping data on-prem is safer than the cloud. This is definitely up for debate, as there are some great pros and cons for sure. I say it's rarely safer. We call this the "it's safe because I can see it" approach. Having direct access to your hardware may feel like you've got greater control, but in actual reality, it can create a single point of failure for your entire system. If there is one thing you should take away from these facts and figures, it's this. Cloud is no longer a differentiator. It's actually a strategic requirement for long-term success. I want to say 10 years ago, moving to the cloud was about staying ahead of the curve, but that's no longer the case. Now it's about keeping up and providing customers and employees with the always-on services that they expect, and so they should. Cloud gives you instant access to all latest features, security upgrades, bug fixes, and more. And when you keep your software and computing power on-prem, every time a new feature pops up, which is usually 2 to 4 times a year, a manual upgrade is in order. And the obvious cost here is on the IT team, who need both time and budget to make those changes and often have to schedule downtime that may have an impact on the whole organization. The less obvious cost to the business is that when you're upgrading only a couple of times a year, each bug brings with a whole lot of new features. And this means every time you upgrade, the team faces a new learning curve. With cloud, on the other hand, releases can be as small as a single bug fix or product improvement, enabled for a handful of customers at a time to lessen the risk of introducing new bugs. This means if something does go wrong, the change is easy to roll back and its impact is limited. Instead of waiting 3 months for the next release to fix a system or bug, teams have that fix the moment that it's ready. And it also means that customer feedback can be implemented quickly, improving your systems on a continuous basis. And lastly, because new features are rolled out regularly and in small batches, it's easier for your teams to keep up with those changes instead of having to retrain themselves several times a year. This not only keeps teams competitive by giving them immediate access to the latest features, but it also keeps them agile and connected to the systems they use every single day. So on that note, I would like to say thank you so much for visiting and listening to my presentation today. I'm so excited to see all of you hopefully implement a thing or two that I've taught you all today. If you would like to know more information about how we do security here at Atlassian, you can go over and visit the Atlassian Trust Center, or to keep up to date with all the latest features, roadmaps, and so forth, you can head on over to our Trust and Security community page. Thank you and good luck on your endeavor into cloud security. Bye for now.
All right, everyone, and we are back for a quick bit of QA with the live Jody here. So Jody, again, great session. Pretty interesting. And I think the one question I would like to ask to kind of keep on theme with the whole conference theme is, what advice would you give to someone who's just starting out in cybersecurity? Where does one begin?
Hi, Lee, and thank you so much for allowing me to present today to you all. That's a really good question. Where does one start? Look, cybersecurity, it's just such a huge industry, but I think for one, I think the most important thing that you should do when you first start is absolutely network. Network. Get yourself to those industry conferences. Start putting yourself out there. You are a walking billboard. You are a walking brand. If you want to know anything about cybersecurity, start asking those questions. Go up and introduce yourself to people and make yourself known to these people that you are interested in this space. Do a lot of research. There's so much valuable information online that can really bolster your knowledge and your skill set. And I think the really amazing thing about our industry is that we're all in the same boat. We all want to help each other out. We all want each other to succeed. So, really put yourself out there, start asking those questions, get yourself to those conferences like Team SecCon, for example. And I really do believe that you will become quite successful, in our industry. So I look forward to hopefully answering more questions on Slack. And yeah, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here to talk to everyone today. Jody, really appreciate it.
Thanks, Lee.
All right. So for those of you out there who are keeping track of the agenda, we are actually in break mode right now. And in fact, it ends in about 20 seconds. So I think what we're actually going to do is we're going to go right into our next session, but don't worry, we have a long break coming up after that before we jump into the panel. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to talk about our next speaker, Florian. So Florian is a senior security engineer at Atlassian's product security team, and he has a deep technical understanding and a strong interest in cloud infrastructure security and, well, really anything to do with complex security architectures. Originally from Germany, Florian relocated to Australia for Atlassian and is based in Adelaide, where he receives both moral and the occasional interruption from his border collie, Loki. I'm lucky enough to be able to work with Florian from time to time, and really I couldn't think of anyone better to talk to us today about Atlassian's cloud security principles. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start Florian's session.
Hey everyone, my name is Florian. I'm a security engineer at Atlassian, and today I'll be talking about Atlassian's cloud platform security principles. Wow, that's a mouthful, so let me break it down. First of all, I'll be talking about what Atlassian's cloud platform is. That we actually try to encode in this platform. I'll then at the end present you with a couple of takeaways that how you can apply that at home in your own organization. So let's begin. What is Atlassian's cloud platform? Essentially, it is an abstraction built on top of AWS, who is our cloud provider, and it allows multiple teams across the organization to add functionality to it. Not only do you have a resource to run your business logic in compute units, so that's usually EC2 instances, but these teams can also add functionality like you can get a database, you can get a load balancer, etc. So you can hear that it essentially sounds like what AWS obviously already gives you as a cloud platform, but on top of that, we've made it such that we've abstracted away a lot of the complexity. We can be more opinionated, and we can encode stricter security assumptions and requirements into it. It allows developers to focus on the business logic and not worry so much how they get from having code to running code in production. Atlassian can take care of a lot of that within the platform. Here's what that could look like, for example. So we have these so-called service descriptors, which, as you can see, is a simple YAML file. And you provide a couple of parameters like the name of the service, a description. And then, as you see, there's a compose section. So essentially, your business logic lives in this Docker container that you provided. And that's all the code you write. And the rest is configuration. So you see at the bottom, for example, the developers provided that they want a database. And so this system will make sure that their service, when it goes live, when it's running, has access to a database. So that's just how that looks in practice. So what's our role in this setup with the platform and developers? Essentially, we partner with the teams building out the platform to ensure that it's secure on the inside, so that all the components are secure, that they interact in a secure way. We make sure that we build secure architectures from the ground up, and where we find issues, we recommend new architectures or approaches to mitigate problems and provide a more secure way forward. On top of that, we might actually come up with additional features that we would like this platform to have. And on occasion, we need developers to actually make changes to their service to adopt whatever new features out there. And in that case, we also play advocates for these features because we come from the perspective of a security team that says, hey, we recommend teams adopt these particular features. And I'll go into more detail in a bit. There's this quote that I really enjoy, which is called Conway's Law, and it says, any organization that designs a system defined broadly will produce a design whose structure is a copy of the organization's communication structure, which I like to dumb down a little to just don't fight the org chart. So internally, our platform is separate in the org chart from security, and we recognize that from the start. So we found champions within these platform teams that are championing our mission, that are advocating for the security team within. And we got the leadership buy-in early on from these platform teams. That's important because otherwise we couldn't have succeeded. It is all about that relationship, and it removed a lot of barriers right from the start. So we suggest and provide support, but they really need to be on board to make it happen. Otherwise, this wouldn't be able to work out. So, as I promised, now we get to the meat of the talk, so the security principles. I won't go into detail of how we build all of these, because that's a talk on its own for each of them. But the principles are basically slightly more concrete examples of generic security principles that you already know, like least privilege, but they're sort of more opinionated, more applied to this particular context. Now, if you've been paying attention to the industry within cloud security, you may have heard Netflix talk about their so-called paved path, and we found that to be both quite an inspiration and something that we had already to an extent seen as working out at Atlassian. And so we took that and essentially tried to apply a very similar approach to the one Netflix recommends. So if you haven't seen that, I strongly recommend you look for Netflix's talks on these principles as well, because they have a lot of great resources, and I don't want to repeat everything. But some of the things that we take particular interest in, I'll go over here. So first of all, when we build this platform, we want to make sure that we have secure defaults. So for example, the cloud platform will automatically update your operating system. Everyone knows patching is hard, making sure everything is patched is hard, and the impact to each team, the friction it provides, the level of time commitment of keeping your operating system up to date, well, that's all abstracted away, and the platform does it for you. So it's secure by default. You don't have to do anything. So in general, we want to make sure that some features are just always there. Some features developers have to explicitly opt out of, so they can say, okay, but I have an edge case where actually I want to take control of this particular security feature. You can do that, but you have to specifically make that request rather than the other way around, because the only way we can make this work is by default we're secure. So you can opt out of the auto update, but then it's your responsibility to ensure that you redeploy your service regularly so you get the new patched version. The other thing is we want to provide one implementation for our security controls. So we have the business logic running in containers. And then, for example, in this case, it's Docker containers. We want to make sure that if there was a security issue, you can't break out of the container to go onto the host operating system. We've reviewed that implementation. We've made sure that's secure. We could support the platform team to ensure that they have secure controls here. And so now individual developers that might want to stand up their compute unit on their own and run Docker containers, well, they don't get this benefit because they don't get this review from the security team out of the box. It's that we were able to focus our effort on this single implementation. It also means that our team has a reduced load because obviously if you run business critical software, you need regular security review, you need to review new features, you need to review the architecture. Now, if I can already be confident that a large chunk of the underlying infrastructure is secure because I've reviewed the single implementation, well, that gives me already a great deal of confidence. And lastly, we want to have well-defined trust boundaries. So we want to use policy as code so that our engineers, when they review services, can easily understand what is and isn't allowed. And it makes our reviews much easier, much faster, and it allows we can cover a larger area. It's also documentation and implementation in one. So what I mean by that, I'll show you on the next slide. Here's what an example policy looks like to explain permissions on API endpoints. So I have a human readable description, that's my documentation, and then I have a fairly easy to read sort of set of attributes. So I have methods, which in this case is star, so it's HTTP methods like get, post, etc. I have a list of paths, in this case it's this API v1 of the thing. So I say all methods on this particular path, well, they can only be accessed by certain principles. ASAP is our internal service-to-service authentication. So what I'm saying here, only services can access this API endpoint and only certain issuers, client A and client B. So that's two service identities. No one else can access this API endpoint. And if I haven't written any other policies, this is the only thing that will be allowed and everything else will be denied. Now, as an engineer, developer, security engineer, I can look at this and I immediately understand what the service allows and doesn't allow, and I can immediately understand that this is worth paying attention to because this API endpoint can actually be accessed. It allows us to zero in on things, it allows us to understand what the service intends to do. It generally provides us with a very quick way to understand a service. Now you've seen, I spent a lot of time on paved path, that's intentional. There's a lot of effort focused in this, but we have a few other items as well. One you may have heard before, we call defense in depth, that I also like to describe as onions versus castles. So we want to make sure that there are layers, that there are hurdles at every step, and not just one big barrier. So if you look into the industry, there's an approach where you put everything behind a VPN. Once you're on the VPN, you're through, you got access to everything. And then the new modern approach, shepherded by, pioneered by Google mostly, is called Zero Trust, or they call it Beyondcorp, which is the idea that actually at every step, I verify. And so we're trying to encode this as much as we can into our cloud platform as well. One principle there we call don't trust your neighbor. So you never know if the service right next to you maybe has been compromised, maybe it has security vulnerability. And so you want to verify at every step that the assumptions you're making are actually holding true. So if you assume that a service is acting on behalf of a user, well, it's going to be passing you a token that identifies what user is acting on behalf of. And that will be signed by a different service, which is called our edge authenticator. That's authenticated the user, and now that token is present. So at every step, I can verify the token. I don't just have to take the other service's word for it. So in that way, even a service that's compromised can't forge these tokens. It needs to stay within its own scope. And the third principle I have here is called fear the red team. So the idea is the red team is an internal security testing team, and they go and compromise your engineers. That's also handy for messaging within the organization. It's hard as a security team to say, oh, we don't trust our own employees, because you do want to trust them. Your employees should be able, you should be able to trust your employees not to be malicious. But everyone understands that mistakes are human, and we've internally seen that just about everyone can be compromised by the red team. And so how we build these defenses in layers and how we keep our engineers away from customer data is paramount to our approach of assuming that engineers can be compromised. So AWS has this principle that says, we keep engineers away from customer data. And the idea here being that even if an engineer is compromised, is that insider threat to your organization, they don't have access to customer data for Atlassian. That's our crown jewels. That's what we want to protect. The other bit is that we segment our network. So customer data is actually firewalled off and can't be accessed directly from the network. So that provides an additional layer. So it also goes back to that defense in depth, where even if the red team compromises an engineer, they don't have network level access to customer data. They need to go through very defined mechanisms, which is the last point here, where we have clearly defined processes, because customer data sometimes needs to be accessed. The support engineer will need to access specific customers' data to support in whatever way the customer required it, and that often involves looking at the customer's data and interacting with their particular instance. So for example, in this case, if you go to Atlassian support and you raise a ticket, you will be asked to consent to the support engineer accessing your data, and without that consent, they can't see your data. Similarly, internally, engineers will maybe need to run some sort of database migration, which might be a manual process. Well, in that case, I can't go and ask every customer for their consent, and I'm not actually intending to see their data. I just need to run a transformation on it, for example. In this instance, we have a peer review system where you can absolutely run this query, but one of your peers will review the operation you're looking to perform. And lastly, with incidents, for example, if you have an incident, you don't have time to go through a peer review process. So instead, we verify that an incident for the service is open, and then confirm, yes, there's an incident, yes, this engineer is involved in resolving it. We grant them access without the peer review, but we will do an escalation afterwards and make sure that we review the access and the operations that happened. That way, you can resolve the incident quick, but you still get that process to make sure that all access to customer data was controlled. So, like I promised, there's a couple takeaways here that trying to make that a bit more generic and how we came to these principles, other than obviously you saw looking at the industry, what are our peers doing, what can we do, what works for Atlassian. The first and most important step for us was to identify what is our company's crown jewels, what's really worth protecting. Now for Atlassian, that's our customer data, because our customers are entrusting us with this data, and we got to make sure that we keep it contained, that only the people that should have access under defined mechanisms. So that allows us to zero in, and if a developer on the side does some innovation, doesn't work on customer data at all, we maybe don't need to protect that as strongly. Yes, we still need to protect it from certain threats, like, if you put an EC2 instance on the internet, you might get Bitcoin mining or whatever. But there's no customer data, so the risk is lower. So that's really important here to identify what is your company's actual risk. And for a bank, that's maybe something else entirely. There, like any financial institution, is faced with very different threats that Atlassian does. So you can't do it all the same, which is why you need to first look at what do you actually need to protect. Second, you want to understand your company strategy. And you want to engineer your solutions towards it. So Atlassian had already recognized that due to our nature with having multiple products, a platform is going to be a beneficial approach. The security team didn't come up with the idea of a platform. We just realized it was there and we can leverage it to build security controls into it. Now, if your company only has one product, a platform might not make so much sense, and maybe there are better approaches there. But the principles you can still apply: defense in depth, least privilege, etc. Thirdly, consider that your employees are humans and you want to help make mistakes less likely, and you want to make them less impactful, which means you also should always assume to build with the red team in mind. Assume the red team is going to compromise your engineers. Even if you don't have a red team, pretend you do. What could a powerful, motivated attacker do? Assume they've compromised an employee workstation. What can you do from that? We have an internal system called Red Team Camp, where we wargame out a compromise by saying, okay, I've already compromised the engineer. We hop on a Zoom call and we just walk through a scenario. What would an attacker do? So you don't have to have a formal red team. You can just be a security engineer. It's like, well, if I had compromised this sysadmin, this SRE, this developer, this support engineer, what could I do with the access? So always assume that engineers can be compromised. Don't just put this castle up and saying, okay, engineers are trusted. So whenever I see an engineer around, I immediately assume everything is okay. Similar with the VPN, apply zero trust principles and so on. Right, that was all I had. I believe we now have time for questions. So I'll be in the chat or on the screen and I'll be answering them live. Thank you very much for your attention.
All right, and we actually do indeed have Florian live with us today to do a little bit of Q&A before our long break happens. So Florian, like everyone else, thank you for being here today. Are you ready for a little bit of Q&A?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Lee.
All right, so it looks like we have two questions. And first, I'd like to take one that we got from the audience on our last session. We just want to make sure it's answered all right, but it's about zero trust. So the question was, why is zero trust the new catch-all at the moment? And is this a new concept with a distinction from trust no one? I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that, Florian.
Yeah, well, I would say I'm by no means an expert on zero trust, but you saw me talk about it a little bit. And it's become a bit of an industry buzzword. So to an extent, it's like you got to be careful what people actually mean when they say zero trust. But the idea that you verify at every step, that you don't have that, what I also call onions versus castles, that one barrier, and once you've overcome that, you're in and no one will like check, they will just trust you, but rather having all these barriers along the way, that's a good principle regardless. And if you go back to Google's initial Beyondcorp sort of paper around that, you can read a lot more details on why that's successful for them. Beyond that, I actually think that in a cloud world, it makes a lot more sense because Jody talked about this a little bit as well. You have your APIs that are actually exposed to the internet, right? And with multi-tenanted systems, that's how it's supposed to work. You're not going to include your systems into like different VPNs for all the customers, for all your multiple tenants. And so you got to find a better approach. You got to find something that's more secure. And that's where zero trust comes in, and that's part of the popularity. So one, yes, it's just a more secure approach as the industry has evolved, as well as it also makes more sense in a cloud-first world. To address a little bit the question around, is it a new concept with a distinction from trust no one? Probably not so much, I would say. I would say that's pretty much what it is, right? Like that's what zero trust means. It's like you don't trust, you do check the identity, you do check the permissions at every step, and you don't just sort of implicitly assume any trust. And it's just that that's sort of the buzzword brand name it's been given.
Okay, great. Thank you for the clarification, the explanation. I think that probably answered the question. I think that helped fill in some of the blanks for me, certainly. The next question that I actually have is more to your session. I'm curious if you could walk us through which one of the principles that you talked about in your session that you or even Atlassian as a whole struggled with to implement initially, and then after the struggle, how you kind of went about overcoming those issues.
Yeah, good question. I wouldn't say so much like this sort of assumes that you have the challenge, you solve it, and then it's done. But I actually found that for most of the things, it's actually an ongoing thing. You need to get that initial buy-in, which I talked a lot about, like recognizing that you exist within an organization, right? So it's not a strictly technical problem. And that's what Adrian talked about in his keynote as well, is on the defensive side, there's a lot of people problems that you actually have to solve, a lot of organizational reality that you have to recognize. And so that initial step was always, well, get the buy-in first, because especially with these complex things, you need that buy-in from the engineering side, you need that buy-in from the leadership, and the engineers that end up building it, you want them to be on board, that they care about security, but you want them to be on board with the solution. So make sure that they actually think that what you're doing is a good idea, because they're really smart people. And again, Adrian talked about this. The engineers already know a lot of the stuff. You're just sort of helping them along the way a little bit. So that part is sort of how you overcome that initially. But I wouldn't say that like we ever actually fully overcome it. It's more like we're constantly there. We're constantly pushing for that improvement in these principles. So it's more an individual improvement under this principle that you sort of dedicate time to overcome that. But the principle is a continuous evolving thing.
Excellent. And, to me, that really does also encapsulate the theme of getting started, right? What the whole conference is about. You never just hit a fixed point and you're there. It's always a process.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Excellent. So Florian, I think that actually wraps it up for our Q&A, and we are actually perfectly on schedule at this point to go right into our larger break that we have in the conference today. So we're going to go ahead and jump to break. Florian, thanks again. And I'm actually just going to let everyone know a little bit about some of the charitable organizations that we're working with tonight. But then, like I said, we'll be in our long break. All right, everyone. So we're officially in the big break, the long rest, whatever we want to call it. So from now until the 35-minute mark, we are basically in the clear. We do have a panel coming up with a lot of great panelists, so make sure you stick around for that. Before I go on mute here, I do just want to remind everyone that we have a set of discussions going on in the Slack channel. You should see links all over the Zoom chat for that. And just know that we also have a special gift for attendees. So attendees have the ability to donate money to a nonprofit, contribution free. So just for being in the Slack channel, you can make Atlassian give money to charitable organizations. This is basically a gift for attending the conference. One of the reasons I joined Atlassian was because we actually really care about our values, and this is one of the ways that we wanted to show it. So we're giving each attendee the choice of where their donation will go. So if you join the Slack, you go into the conference discussion channel, and you might have to scroll all the way to the top. There's a little poll. Just by voting, a donation will be made to that organization. And we actually have 3 organizations that we're working with tonight. The first is called Digital Nest out of California in the USA. And they connect teens and young adults from overlooked agricultural communities to skills, resources, and a support community with the purpose of unlocking their full potential, building their confidence, and creating new possibilities for their futures. So that's a great US-based organization. We also have an organization from Australia called Missing School. And this organization actually places telepresence robots in willing schools to basically demonstrate that continuous two-way communication is possible between seriously sick children and their classrooms when otherwise they would be completely absent. So another great organization from Australia. And finally, we're partnering with an international organization called the Malala Fund. And this is founded by student and Nobel laureate Malala Yousafzai. And this organization champions every girl's right to 12 years of free, safe, and quality education. So again, just by joining our Slack channel, saying hi to people, and then putting a little emoji on a post to vote means that money will go to these organizations today. And even at the very end of the conference today, we're actually going to say how far your votes are going. So make sure you check that out. And with that, again, at the, 35-minute mark, our panel is starting. So we have about 7, 8, 9 minutes or so. So I suggest everyone take a break, get a drink, get a snack, and we'll be right back with more. All right, everyone. I hope you took a moment here to rest, get a drink, perhaps a snack, and enjoyed the musical interlude. And we are back for our panel. So certainly one of the longer events of the night, and I'm sure something that everyone here is looking forward to. And in order to actually run the panel, I have the pleasure of introducing Alice White, who is the Security Training Manager at Atlassian. So I'm going to go ahead and just basically let Alice take it away.
Thank you so much, Lee. It's great to be back after the break. I hope everyone is enjoying the conference and content so far. As Lee mentioned, my name is Alice White and I'm the Security Training Manager here at Atlassian and based in Perth, Western Australia, courtesy of the Atlassian's Team Anywhere policy. Today, I have the pleasure of moderating the live panel discussion, and I'm thrilled to introduce our panelists today, with whom they'll be sharing their thoughts on leadership and advice about cloud security. So without further ado, firstly, I would like to introduce Julia Connect. Julia is the Application Security Engineering Manager at Netflix. Her mission is to scale security across thousands of applications and developer ecosystems that make up all of our favorite entertainment possible. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Julia. Next, we have Michelle Price. Michelle is currently the CEO for AustCyber. AustCyber is the Australian cybersecurity growth network, which exists to grow an Aussie cybersecurity ecosystem, to export Aussie cybersecurity to the world, and make Australia the leading centre for cyber education. Thank you so much for joining us today and your continued support of Team SecCon this year, Michelle. Next, we have Charmaine Tan. Charmaine is the Chief Growth Officer at Securo. Charmaine leads the security outreach strategy aimed at helping the C-suite executives manage cyber risk as part of their business growth objectives. Recognised by the IFSEC as one of the global top 20 cybersecurity influencers and cybersecurity risk leaders author, and is also a TEDx speaker, but also a founder of Cyber Risk Meetup. We are so delighted to have you on the panel here today, Charmaine. And finally, Ben Walther. Ben is the Principal Security Architect at Atlassian, where he drives policy as code implementation and establishes secure development lifecycle practices. He promotes zero-touch prod, a way of keeping humans away from customer data, in part by limiting standing privileges. Ben's also published an O'Reilly book on security testing, taught at a few universities, and contributed to a bunch of OWASP guides. Thank you, Ben, for joining us today. Okay, so we have everyone here. I'm just having a little peek. Awesome. Okay. So to start off the panel today, I thought it'd be fun to ask some rapid fire questions for the audience to get to know you a little bit better. I had the privilege of meeting you pre-event, so I'm sure the audience will get to know you a little bit better through this short section. So for you all, and I will call out to each of you, are you a sweet tooth or savory, and what's your favorite food in that category? Julia.
So this is a very difficult question, I have to say, first of all. I would say I really like both. It depends on the day and the mood, but I'm going to, for sake of being opinionated, say savory. And I think my favorite food grouping would be like different kinds of cheese.
All about the cheese. Me too. Michelle.
I'm with Julia. It's really hard for me, but I'm going to have to stick to my roots though. It's a sweet tooth, and some of you out there know exactly what my favorite sweet tooth food is. It is ice cream. I grew up with it for a whole bunch of really cool reasons. Put it into the channel if you know what it is.
Love it. Audience participation. We're starting early. Charmaine, sweet or savory for you?
Great question to ask during lunchtime. For me, I would say both, but if I have to really pick, I would say spicy. And probably one of my favorite food for now is pad thai, spicy pad thai.
Love it. That was my dinner last night. It's a good one as well, with all the little peanuts on top. Ben, are you sweet, savory, or spicy?
This is not a difficult choice for me. I'm definitely in the savory camp. My favorite item being really good bread. But just as I say that, I am starting a low carb diet this week. So before you all rush out and buy me your favorite kind of bread, I gotta wait until I try this out.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, one more quick question just to get to know you a little bit better. If you had a store, what would you sell? Julia?
If we didn't ask the first question, I would be a cheesemonger. But since I want to add a little bit more variety, I took up knitting over the pandemic. That was kind of my indoor hobby. So I might sell like sweaters or yarn or something. But if I did have a store, I don't know how successful it would be because it takes a really long time to make a human adult-sized sweater. So I feel like the stock would be a problem, but I would give it a shot.
Love it. So you need to start knitting your Christmas sweater now if it's going to take that long. Michelle, if you had a store, what would you sell?
I love that. I've not used my time in lockdown particularly effectively, I have to say, against what Julia just said. But based on the bags under my eyes, I'm literally going to say sleep, like give me sleep. I want and need sleep, and I would love to sell it because I know there's so many people, especially in the security industries, that need more sleep.
Thanks, Michelle. Charmaine, what might you sell?
I'll be one of Michelle's customer. I need sleep for sure. So that's a good one. Mine is like, I saw a store during lockdown. They were actually selling amazing home theater setups. And they have like 10 indoor display where you can go and visit like the home, luxury cinemas. So I'll probably love to sell that just so that I can enjoy the perks.
Awesome. And Ben, might you sell, or what do you sell already? There's probably something you sell already.
Oh, I don't sell anything already. Probably the opposite of Michelle, I'd sell coffee because I have opinions about coffee shops. In the Bay Area, they are too optimized for throughput and they're not comfy. And they judge you if you ask about syrups or flavors or mix-ins. I'm looking at Blue Bottle especially. Like, I want things to be flavorful and sweet and comfy to sit in for a while.
Thanks, Ben. I'm sure you make a very comfy coffee shop. And when we can all travel, I'd love to come visit this comfy coffee shop. Okay, that's fantastic. I do feel like we've got to know you a little bit better. Thank you for those fun insights. Now to the main event, the panel discussion, and we really want to talk about some specific questions that relate to our conference theme, which is getting started in cloud security. I'm sure the audience is eager to hear your thoughts and experiences. And just a reminder to our audience as well, we'd love your participation, and hopefully you can open up the Slack channel and start asking your questions in there as they come to mind through the conversation that we'll roll into now, because they will be able to answer your questions at the end as well. So I again want to, I think this is really important to ask all the panelists. We'd love to hear, how did you get started in security? Julia.
So I got started in security over 10 years ago in my first role at Adobe. I was a system administrator. I think that used to be a title that a lot of people had. And so my responsibility was all things operational security. It was a pretty small team at the time. I think it was before like large security teams really started taking off, or teams got more resourcing for security. So primarily worked on things like rotating passwords on all bunch of different servers all at once, via a bunch of scripts, vulnerability scans, and other kind of operational type things. Worked with a great team of people who really helped me learn a ton about security and really anchor my interest in it, which was really great. I think finding good mentors and good folks to work with really helped me to kind of stick around in security when I was first there. And from there, I actually pivoted into where I've kind of specialized, which is application security, because I've always loved the product and value side of the business, and application security felt a lot closer to that side for me. So switched roles within Adobe and built out our SDLC there, and kind of did a whole bunch of acquisition security onboarding, and then expanded the application security team over there. And then a couple of years ago, went and joined Netflix. So that's kind of the real short version.
Thanks. It really does make it easier doing the job of security that can be hard when you have great people around you. I think you've nailed it there. Michelle, how did you get started in security?
Yeah, I guess it's like a lot of people really. Well, people of my age and older, I should say that, coming through very non-traditional pathways. So I actually started by being in law enforcement, actually. So I wrote the national strategy for law enforcement agencies around how to do better on strategy. And that sounds weird, right? Write the strategy to do better on strategy. And within that, there was obviously a whole range of different security elements. And as a result of that, I actually got asked to go and work for Julia Gillard, who was the Prime Minister at the time in Australia, and got plonked straight smack bang in the middle of national security strategic policy. And so that's how I guess I kind of made my way to where I am today. And so along that way, in this sort of 12 years that I spent working in national security in the Australian government, one of the really big things that I'm proud of is that I did write the country's first national security oration for Julia Gillard, the speech that she gave that kind of put us on the map as a country, that we understood what national security was in a public sense. But I also wrote the first national cybersecurity strategy for Australia. So that's how I came into cybersecurity, I guess in a public way, but behind the scenes did a huge amount of stuff across the intelligence and law enforcement spaces for cybersecurity, both at the technical and the non-technical levels, and have found it to be a really awesome path to get to where I am today.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, I'm really interested in your background and how you've navigated through national security and government, and now cyber. I think you're well set up there to do an amazing job for Australia. Over to Charmaine. What piqued your interest in security?
Oh, so about maybe more than a decade ago, I started out initially in computer engineering, did my degree there as well. And then after that, I ended up in a very different career path. So I went into talent augmentation, right? And then after that, then I moved into cyber risk advisory. And that was with a lot of encouragement and support also from my company, Privasec, who's now called Securo. And they've provided a lot of development opportunities. So I'm one of the product of, where businesses have encouraged and also like invested a lot in developing their stuff. And then I was very encouraged when I got to meet with the AWSN network, which is the Australian Women in Security Network. And there, I saw so many different people from different backgrounds, and the diversity of backgrounds in cybersecurity really inspired me. And that's where I end up today, in a sense where now I'm just leading the outreach strategy for Securo, helping CISOs and CIOs manage their cyber risk as part of trying to achieve their business growth objectives.
Yeah, that business element and tying it with cybersecurity goals is really important. Ben, how did you get started in security?
I'm going to really date myself here because when I was 13 years old, my family got America Online. Sorry for all the Australians out there. They called it America Online even in Australia, which is weird. And at some point, I learned that you could kick other people offline from AOL Instant Messenger by sending specially crafted HTML messages. And that was my first introduction to security. I kept at it, and in college, notified the athletics department that I could view all of their athletes' grades and school records, which is really, really against the law. And they called me to go talk to the CIO. Instead of calling law enforcement, they offered me a job and said I could keep doing that as long as I told them what I found. So, yep, it's been a few years.
Yes, you sound a bit cheeky as a teenager and college student, but I'm glad it was it navigated into this profession that you're in here. We're delighted to have you on the Atlassian team. Your wealth of experience. Okay, again, looking at our theme, we talk and bandy around the word the cloud. I think we should start maybe by defining it as well. So how do you describe the cloud to family and friends? Michelle?
It's a great question, Alice. Obviously we still do know people that when you say the cloud, they literally do this. Which I think is awesome. I think that's actually really cool. But yes, I do explain to people that it's like a mega computer. Like, I know that that's like, again, sort of really kind of bringing it down to earth, boom tish. But yeah, I just sort of explain it a bit like a supercomputer, but then also describe all of the server racks. It's like, when you see all of those flashing lights in all of the sci-fi kind of movies and stuff like that, that's what it is. It's a whole bunch of, it's like server farms that are all sort of stitched together that give a huge amount of compute power. And, then go on to talk about, sort of all of the sort of different data centers and things like that. So I kind of try and use it as a way to open up a conversation on IT infrastructure and just how important cloud infrastructure is now as part of the world's, digital sort of things that we sort of have parked ourselves well and truly in terms of dependence.
Thanks, Michelle. And Julia, if you're at a barbecue with your family and friends, how do you describe the cloud?
I think I would probably start with it's kind of like Uber for computing resources, with a few obviously caveats, but really I think you're able to kind of get on-demand computing resources and services. It's not like Uber in that some random person is going to come up and drive you around, but you are able to kind of say, I would like these types of servers and these types of things, make it so with a couple of buttons. You don't have to own the actual server racks and things like Michelle was talking about, right? It really allows you to kind of rent those things, pay a subscription fee, and to build things on top of it, right? So you can really build on top of this service that's available to you really more on demand than traditional IT infrastructure has been.
Yeah. And some people get a little bit nervous about moving to the cloud. And I talked to my mom and she's like, oh, I don't want to put it in the cloud. Where does it go? And to Michelle's point, she kind of does this as well. How would you allay those fears or describe some of the neat features that you get with cloud, Julia?
Yeah, let's see. I definitely have had some of those conversations where people get nervous about putting stuff in the cloud because it does seem very ethereal, right? It's just there. And so I would say that there's a few great things about the cloud. I think you can really count on someone who has set up a service in the cloud or the cloud providers have at least done due diligence on security if you have a reliable one, like one of the well-known ones, so you can trust at least kind of the platform as a service to have done due diligence. I would say if I was talking to someone who's considering building something on top of the cloud, that's also a really great place to start. But then if you are going to build something on top of the cloud, you also get reliability, other things that you're really not responsible for that you can count on them for. So you can spin up a bunch of architecture really quickly with configuration files and have that same kind of architecture spun up and spun down very quickly and easily. That probably wouldn't allay my mom's concerns about putting her pictures in the cloud, but I would say that there are a lot of also folks on the internet who are poking at more of these well-known services, and a lot of the programs and folks who are supporting those have ways for people to report security issues in a responsible way. And so you can hopefully count on them having security teams who are being responsible with the data that is in the cloud.
That's a really good segue into talking about the responsibilities, the shared responsibility model. Should get the audience, if you're not familiar with cloud security, to have a look at that shared security model for the cloud as well, and that might aid you there. Anything you wanted to add, Michelle, about features and allaying concerns?
Yeah, I think building on what Julia said, often I characterize it in actually largely the same way, and talk about the differences between public cloud and private cloud. And that actually, whether you're it's your mum or your grandfather, or, actually even your kids, right? Or your nieces and nephews, right through to large businesses that are still really, really kind of in legacy industries, and have heard from often, let's try not to stereotype, but it's kind of what happens, right? Often they're boomer friends that don't necessarily understand how technology has gotten to where it is today, but are users of it, is to talk about that public versus private. And that, I am a massive, massive advocate for the Apple environment, not the Android environment, because, most of us security folks are of that nature. And I use that as an example if I'm talking to a mum or to a teenager, but, if it's in business, I do refer to the difference between a public and private cloud and how much control you've got over your data if you're sitting in a public versus private cloud. And if you choose to go for a public cloud, really ask these kinds of questions and, kind of get into the data sovereignty and data localization type issues. Now, that's often because I'm briefing boards and using the strategic policy side of it, and how that's an important element of their strategies overall, that they actually really do have to care about these things. But they get the choice, right? At the end of the day, it's their choice, but they have to take responsibility for the outcomes of those choices. They need to be conscious choices and not just kind of the tick and flick because it's a convenience to just get on with whatever they're doing.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, you've touched on businesses and boards, and I wanted to come to Charmaine and talk about how you interact with your CISO networks as part of your role. So I was going to ask you, what are some of the good ways you've seen CISO and leaders exercise improving cloud capabilities?
Yeah, I would say the sentiments, first of all, from the CISOs is that they find businesses can get really excited about migrating everything to cloud, but not necessarily understanding the risk of a fairly complex and new environment. So some of the ways the CISOs have found it quite helpful is to leverage on maybe third-party tools, or there's also the CSP free enterprise support that they've been using to help their teams get skilled up. And they did also highlight that the mindset has to change. So moving from traditional perimeter and console-based defenses to DevSecOps sort of mindset. So it's no longer about server hardening, but infrastructure as a code. But at the end of the day, cloud security shouldn't be treated differently from any other infrastructure or application, because moving to the cloud doesn't necessarily mean that you are more or less secure. You definitely still need to independently assess your own systems and make sure that you're aware of what you're exposing publicly and that your systems and servers are secure.
Yeah, and once they make that conscious decision, and Julie's talking about due diligence that we have to do and businesses have to do, what are some of the other challenges that you see migrating to the cloud when they do start that journey from your network?
Yeah, I think they have to think about scalability, about right skill sets as well. How do they bridge their internal gaps with their internal team? So those are and also if you think about it, there's a huge mountain of data that, we're dealing with, and how do you translate that? For example, PII, it can't translate Chinese characters at the moment. And also it's just trying to, if you think about also S3 bucket misconfiguration and data leaks. So these are the common issues that they have to look at. And if you think about compliance, it measures security at a certain point in time, right? But for cloud, how do you track everything, including code changes? And then there is also the notion of trust, because a CISO's job is to make sure that their customers trust their companies. But how do we embed that trust into cloud? So there's a lot of questions to think about, but in general, we need to constantly test and audit our cloud environment so that we can be confident in preventing or at least limiting a breach.
It's a never-ending job, isn't it? We have to constantly check and recheck. And speaking about trust, Atlassian's security team has recently come together with the risk and compliance team, and now we're called the trust organization. And that customer trust is really important. And Atlassian is very open about putting a lot of emphasis on migrating products to the cloud. And I was going to go to Ben and ask you, with this, as the migration to cloud services continues, what are some of the benefits are being realized for security through the cloud migration?
Yeah, it's interesting. Security is becoming productized and mass produced. And what I mean by that is that it used to be a cottage industry, right? Everyone was responsible for setting up the security of their data center and the product and packages they installed. And so everyone kind of had to know how to do it themselves. I imagine it the same way that like people used to maintain gardens or farms, now they go to the grocery store. And patching is the prototypical example here. If you use cloud services, you don't have to patch whatever you're consuming as a SaaS or an infrastructure as a service is patched for you. And this allows gathering of improvements to get owned by the services or owners or companies that have the most at risk, being the infrastructure or SaaS providers, instead of distributed out in the form of best practices, which is, any human communication across an industry is going to be slow. It does make me kind of wonder if one day there will be like a homestead security movement where we all write IP table rules with punch cards via candlelight, getting it back to how it used to be. But it really does seem like the trend started with infrastructure as a service companies like AWS offering things like guard duty, and now SaaS companies layering on top of that, like Salesforce offers Shield, Atlassian offers Access, where individual companies should have less and less responsibility for information security. Like Nike and McDonald's or Macca's, why do they need to be cloud security experts? They should be able to buy that as a product or an add-on from cloud security vendors.
Yeah, and you've touched on customers there, and customer requirements seem to be ever growing. So how has Atlassian been tackling those customer requirements? What sort of interactions and changes and course of actions had to be taken?
Yeah, I wasn't trying to toot Atlassian's horn too much, but if you're going to ask directly, there's a couple of ways. One of which was really the focus of Florian's talk on building out a secure platform. So I'm not going to belabor that too much, but the use of secure defaults is really the kind of cutting edge modern way of tackling security at scale. There's also the compliance angle that we've talked about a little bit. Atlassian is focusing on FedRAMP compliance next, as well as a host of other ways of ascertaining current security posture. Trello is actually already FedRAMP authorized because they're a little bit more cloud native. They were able to move a little bit more quickly. Jira and Confluence are coming. But security and compliance have a weird relationship. So I guess the other thing that we also track is cloud migration blockers. And this is a spot where Atlassian is in a little bit of a distinct transition area, because a lot of our products were not cloud native, like Jira, Confluence, and Bitbucket started as on-prem products. And a lot of our most security conscious customers are really reluctant to move all of that critical and sensitive data to our cloud products, even in 2021. So we maintain a list of cloud migration blockers focused on security, and we track them like features. We even have them in our publicly declared roadmap of when you can expect things like bring your own key encryption to surface. And so we treat security requirements a lot like we treat other requirements. We promise them and then we deliver according to those promises. And I'll throw a link to that that roadmap in the Discord, or sorry, in the Slack.
Thank you, Ben. Julia, is there anything you wanted to add from the Netflix perspective and the cloud journey and the cloud experience and cloud requirements?
Yeah, I would say that Netflix has been in AWS for quite a while now. So I think that the journey has been undergone for a long time. And there's definitely a lot of work that's been done by the Netflix security team for cloud security things. And I know that a lot of the things that we've built internally have been open source, and then, you know, you kind of eventually even become services that are provided by the cloud providers themselves. So I think that it's definitely something where at scale, we kind of get to run into some of the edges of where cloud providers are and help to kind of push some of those boundaries as well.
That's really interesting that you get to influence some of the cloud providers' strategy there as well. And I know Florian did also reference the Netflix cloud architecture as well in his presentation. So I highly encourage anyone who missed that as part of the conference to go back and have a look. Now, just wanted to remind the audience, we are taking questions in a couple of moments. So jump in there and get asking. Let me just have a quick look at the conference discussion. Cool. Okay, bring that over. Now, again, the theme, getting started in cloud security. I'd love to hear how some of you have upskilled yourself in cloud security. We heard in Adrian's, our Chief Trust Officer's opening address as well, that only part of his 20 years of experience in security has cloud been around, and only part of that has he been working in cloud security. So I was just going to ask maybe you, Michelle, first. Is there any advice to others or resources that you'd like to point to about upskilling yourself or getting involved in cloud security?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously there's loads around, but, you know, some good resources. I love that Adrian referred to that actually, because, yeah, I can actually distinctly remember the day that I started to hear cloud infrastructure being repeated more than once, and outside of like us, like full tilt security nerds, you know. It was back in 2011 in Australia, actually, at least at a sort of an operational level. So in the scheme of things, it actually, yeah, like hasn't been around that long. So some really, really good resources, frankly speaking, are actually from those who are using, you know, great secure cloud environments. Atlassian really is one of those. So the resources that have already been mentioned, for example, and, you know, with Ben pointing to the fact that Atlassian does make public its roadmap, you can actually look at what's happened before today around where Atlassian's been in its cloud journey. And that's got a wealth of knowledge right there. There's some awesome companies that, you know, put out blogs, for example. I can't like miss the opportunity to plug some of the companies that our cyber supports, for example, AU Cloud and Vault Cloud in Australia, that are sovereign cloud providers, and also companies like SecureStack, who provide the kind of app security specifically within cloud environments. They produce some fantastic blogs that really do have some awesome information. But also, if you're dialing in from the US, like CISA produces some great information, as does in Australia, the ACSC. If you're dialing in from Europe, there's actually, so I know it's kind of a little bit sensitive now because of Brexit, but actually the NCSC out of the UK also produces some awesome work. But actually the best resources that I've ever seen around cloud security is actually from the CERT in New Zealand. And the reason why I call them out is because the language that they use to describe the different machinations of what's involved in cloud security, much like what we've been referring to today, is in all plain English. So it really does speak at it from the level of someone who's been involved in security more broadly, but also someone who's never had anything to do with security at all. It's really accessible. So don't Google it, don't get the misinformation, go to the great sources, as I said, including Atlassian, and you'll find some fantastic ways to start engaging with it. And it's actually a really fascinating topic.
Thanks, Michelle. Maybe we get you to drop that New Zealand cert and that accessible content into the chat for some of our attendees. Now, Charmaine, I'm going to go to you and ask you about how you've upskilled yourself in a moment, but we also have a question fantastically from the audience, one for Ben and one for Julia. So Ben and Julia, if you have a quick look in the thread, and then I'll throw to you to answer those questions after we've heard from Charmaine about her advice to upskill yourself in cloud security and resources.
Sorry, so are we waiting for Ben and Julia?
No, you're going to go first. They're just
Right,
going to
okay.
prepare to respond to the questions.
Sorry. Okay, no, I was just thinking Michelle was sharing so much information, and I was like, okay, if people, you need to get a pen to like write down and scribble, then I realized Ashton is busy doing all the updates. So that's really, really good. Like there's a lot of resources that she shared that I was like, wow, really, really good. Like my advice would be leverage on like, look at what you have around you at the moment, right? So for me, right, if I have a cloud, I have a cloud security experts team, and that they will be my peers that I go to get soundboard with and get advice. So I would say leverage on your internal people, but also leverage on communities. There's a lot of great resources out there. AWS and Azure do have good foundation courses that actually explains the basics of cloud technology and security. And there's just a lot out there, like podcasts, for example. I know in the US, they have so many good podcast channels. Actually, there's one in Australia as well. It's a cloud security. I can't remember the exact name. It's run by Ashish, and he's been having lots of guests across Australia and the US. They're all cloud experts, and every episode, they discuss about the current challenges or different approaches to go about things. So there's a lot out there. Actually, you just have to search for it, and then start with that. And then, just don't be afraid to reach out as well. Look for mentors, people who have been doing this for a lot longer, and then feel free to bounce ideas off them. So that would be how I go about things.
Highly agree with that, looking for mentors, networking, and Jodie touched on it in her response to one of the questions from the audience. Network. If you want to get started in security, the people that I've found in this community have been absolutely amazing in providing advice and guidance and being that sounding board. Thanks, Charmaine. Ben, for you, you mentioned secure by default. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
A little bit, and I'll also put some links for further reading so that you can get more than just soundbite introduction. Essentially, anytime that you're going to craft some security-related functionality over and over again, package it up into a library or a sidecar or a service so that you can have one implementation that the security team can vet really well and make sure works effectively and avoids common pitfalls. You can then avoid having teams duplicate that work, and also they're less likely to accidentally introduce a security flaw. And even if you do have a security flaw, you can fix it in one spot and deploy it everywhere, rather than having to go audit all of the code across the entire organization. And so really, this is a pretty standard engineering approach just applied to security. One of the people that talks about it quite a bit is Clint Gibbler, who hosts a website called TLDRSec, or Too Long Didn't Read Sec. And he has an entire slide deck on the practice of establishing secure defaults and then having lightweight checks to make sure that everybody is using those defaults rather than rolling their own. So I'll put that link in the chat.
Thank you, Ben. And over to you, Julia, for a question about Paved Path that Netflix uses. Could you share a little bit more about how you see that program being successful at Netflix?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that the Paved Path and Securities partnership with folks that work on the Paved Path is one of the highest leverage activities that we do as a security team. So to give a little background on the Paved Path is kind of this phrase we use, paved path or paved road, for the well-supported services at Netflix. We have an organization of 100+ people who are our productivity engineering team, and they're dedicated to making sure that developers can be productive. So you might imagine you come into Netflix on your first day as a developer, and you download a command line tool that allows you to create a new application that's pretty Netflixified and kind of works in our environment, and you're able to deploy very smoothly, and you can kind of get, I was actually very impressed when I joined and did the dev bootcamp and was able to kind of go from like 0 to hello world running in our AWS environment in like less than a couple hours. And that was because I was also going through like the tutorial, right? So we aim to like very quickly support developers being productive. And so obviously a lot could go wrong there. And so Netflix Security invests really, really heavily in being strongly partnered to that team. And so we work to kind of inject security into those paved paths and make things secure by default. So for example, paved path application is kind of born with authentication and support for our authorization systems inside of the application types that are supported by the paved path. We also are another really interesting example that I kind of had the opportunity to work a bit on is our secure authenticated gateway. So we worked with a partner team in our cloud infrastructure group to work on an authenticated gateway that we could put in front of applications, because we were finding that we had applications that had like authentication issues or authentication not implemented correctly. And so we said, let's offload this to the platform. Let's make an authenticated gateway that we put in front of our applications. And so as a property of the architecture, really, you had to go through this authentication flow. And so no communication was happening to this application in an unauthenticated way. And so we were able to kind of kill a class of problems that we had to deal with. And so then from there, we really were able to kind of say, okay, this is great. And it's running in front of a lot of our workforce facing apps. What other things could we add into this? And so we added in our web application firewall. We added in anti-DDoS protection and a couple of other features. I actually co-wrote with a couple of other folks at Netflix a blog post on this pretty recently, and I can also drop that into the channel. But it was a fun write-up of an example of how we use the paved path at Netflix to really say, incentivize people to use the things that are kind of secure by default and work well in our environment, and then add security into those things. So they really get them for free, and developers can offload worrying about that to a platform team where we can kind of have it very consistently configured and consistently understood. And then my team, the application security engineering team, can then detect which applications are using this or not. And then we can kind of say like which applications might be more or less risky based on whether or not it's using some of these paved path tools. So I think it's really successful, and I really like that the incentive is there as far as being really usable security for developers.
Thanks, Julia. Yes, please do drop that link from that blog into the channel there. And it must be such a good feeling being able to almost squash a whole class of vulnerabilities when you build it in from there for everyone to use. Okay, that is bringing us to the end of our panel session, which I could keep on talking and asking questions to these four amazing panelists, but we have to end somewhere. It was fantastic conversation. We absolutely loved hearing your insights. It was great you could share some of the challenges and opportunities for security in the cloud environments, and also navigating one's career into security and maybe into more specialized roles in cloud security as well. So Julia, Charmaine, Michelle, and Ben, thank you for joining us today. We are super fortunate to have the opportunity to hear and learn from you. Great, strong, resilient leaders in this space with really different perspectives on the world of security. We look forward to seeing more of what you're doing and hearing more about it in things like that, in things like blog posts, etc. All of our panelists are on LinkedIn, so if you're not connected with them already, please do. I'm sure they'd welcome that. And I'm going to throw back to Lee briefly before we take a short break and before we hear from our amazing Ria.
That's right, everyone. On behalf of everyone, thank you to all the panelists for taking the time to come here today. It's getting some great reviews out there based on what I'm seeing flash by in Slack. So yes, like Alice mentioned, we are moving on to a break. We are going to be back at the 25-minute mark. So we have about 6 minutes from right now. And we'll be back with a session from Ria, and then we have some closing commentary as well. So stick around. There's still a little bit more to come. All right, everyone. Welcome back from our last break. And with that, we also have our last session. So next up, we have Ria. Ria is a cybersecurity professional and currently works as a product security engineer at Atlassian, based in India. Ria's primary focus and interest surrounds conducting critical security reviews and uplifting Atlassian's security posture by helping core teams adopt security controls. Prior to joining Atlassian, Ria worked as a software engineer for Square, and she graduated from Georgia Tech with a master's degree in cybersecurity, where she thoroughly enjoyed participating in Capture the Flag challenges. In her spare time, Ria loves hiking and has found a new interest during the COVID pandemic: interior design. And this session may not be about interior design, but it is all about supply chain cyber attacks. So with that, let's go ahead and hear from Ria.
Hi everyone, my name is Ria and I work as a product security engineer at Atlassian. Today I'm going to be talking to you about supply chain cyber attacks and why it is important to break the chain. First up, I would like to give you a brief introduction about what a supply chain attack is. Then I will give you some examples and talk about the types of attacks that we have seen recently. I also want to focus on a novel supply chain attack called dependency confusion. Then I'll talk about how we mitigated it, the problems that we faced while enabling some of these mitigations, and then an end note to wrap it all up. In 1984, Ken Thompson published a paper called Reflections on Trusting Trust. It was one of the first papers that I read in grad school, and it says, "You can't trust code that you did not totally create yourself." A few decades later, this still stands just as true, except now we have a large number of packages that we import into our code without much thought. This imported code becomes a dependency for our services. We may write extremely secure code, but what if one of our trusted imported dependencies becomes vulnerable? A supply chain attack is a technique in which an adversary slips malicious code or even a malicious component into a trusted piece of software or hardware. Now, to give you an example of the breadth of possibilities when it comes to supply chain attacks, let's talk about the data breach that affected one of the largest US online retailers, Target, in 2013. According to Krebs on Security, an HVAC firm called Physiomechanical in Pennsylvania suffered an email malware infection. This email malware infection was used to steal VPN credentials that Physiomechanical used to connect to Target's network. Using this VPN access, the attackers were able to push malware to cash registers of Target stores across the US. This data breach is said to have affected about 40 million customers, including their debit and credit card information was breached. This hurt Target's profit and public image a lot. Now, more recently, within a year or less, we've seen a large number of supply chain attacks. I am sure everyone has heard the name SolarWinds, and it's become very familiar because of the attack that they suffered in December 2020. Attackers were able to access their infrastructure and add a backdoor to their widely used network and monitoring platform called Orion. This platform was used by a lot of Fortune 500 companies, and it was also used by the US government. This backdoor gave attackers access to a lot of SolarWinds clients. Then in Jan 2021, a digital certificate that Mimecast used to provide email security services for Microsoft 365 accounts was compromised. The compromise is said to have affected about 10% of Mimecast customers, and the possible impact of the compromised certificate was that attackers were able to access Microsoft Exchange servers, infiltrate Microsoft 365 customers, and their email communications. Next, in April 2021, a testing coverage platform called CodeGov was also affected by a supply chain attack. Attackers were able to make unauthorized changes to their bash uploader script, which runs on its client's continuous integration systems. The attacker was able to get their HMAC key for their Google Cloud Storage account, and then they used this key to upload a malicious version of the bash uploader script to GCS, which was directly downloaded by end users. This issue was identified only when a customer noticed a discrepancy in the fingerprint of the script that was present on the GitHub account versus the one that was present on GCS. Now, Browserify is a popular JavaScript package which is hosted on NPM. A malicious version called Web Browserify was uploaded to NPM as well. It resembled Browserify, but it contained a hard-to-detect malicious executable. Some user may be tricked into downloading Web Browserify instead of Browserify, and the malware runs as soon as you install the package. This package has, however, been removed from NPM since then. More recently, in July 2021, Kaseya suffered a supply chain ransomware attack. A lot of buzzwords right there. A zero-day vulnerability in its on-premise product was used to distribute ransomware to all of its clients that use it. Information about each of these attacks is widely available, and it's pretty detailed online if you're interested in finding out more. Now I want to specifically dive into a novel supply chain attack called dependency confusion. In Feb 2021, a security researcher called Alex Person released an article about how they were able to hack into about 35 or so organizations. In this article, the researcher describes how they were able to identify the names of various internal packages through accidentally published files, and then how they were able to exploit some unfortunate package manager behavior. Let me give you a more detailed example of how this works. Let's say that we have an internal package called internal package version 1.0 hosted internally. A different package, same name but different code, is hosted on the public index. Now we want to be able to download this package from the internal index, so we write the following command: pip extra index URL http private index, so the URL of the private index, install internal package. Where do you think the package is going to be downloaded from? The internal index or the external index? I'll give you a moment to think. Even though we have specified the extra index URL to be the internal index, it still ends up downloading the package from the public index. Now, the reason that this happens is because of the way that pip behaves, especially when the extra index URL is specified. First, it checks if the package exists in the private index, which it does. Then it checks if the package exists in the public index, which it also does in our case. Since it found the package in both locations, it ends up downloading the package that has the higher version number, which is the one in the public index. So it ends up downloading internal package version 1.1. This ambiguous and unfortunate behavior is not just restricted to pip's extra index URL. The researcher found various other package managers such as Ruby's GemSource and JFrog's Artifactory to also be confusing and therefore exposed to dependency confusion. Now, how did the researcher actually leverage this? He searched for names of various internal packages, which was not too difficult to find. He was able to find some names on GitHub as well. Next, he registered malicious versions of these packages on public indexes with higher version numbers. So, for example, he would register an internal package with version 9.9.0. He waited for internal services and organizations to download these malicious packages and ping home. For example, if developers used extra index URL in their code to download internal packages, it became possible for them to download the malicious versions that the researcher had planted on the public index. Lastly, of course, he earned a lot of bounty for this attack. Now, soon after this article was published, we tried to look into mitigations that companies should have in order to prevent these types of attacks. Some of the controls we thought would be extremely beneficial are: first is setting the internal index as the only accessible index. This means that calls to download dependencies should only be made to the internal registry. The code should not directly access the public index. And in case a public package is required by your code, the internal index should proxy the request to the public index only. Using secure defaults that are provided by hosting solutions such as JFrog's Artifactory can also prevent requests for internal packages to be sent to the public index. For example, if we're able to figure out if a package is an internal package or not, Artifactory can be configured to ensure that the download request is never sent to the public index. Next, discouraging the use of problematic parameters such as extra index URL can actually support not having ambiguity in code. This is similar to adopting best security practices in an organization. Lastly, naming conventions and scopes for packages provide a good way to identify which packages belong to your organization and which don't. This way, we can employ central controls to ensure that only certain folks in the organization can make changes to these packages and that they cannot be registered by someone else on public indexes. Some other generic controls are also good for preventing supply chain attacks in general. Some of these are: first is ensuring that all of your dependencies are continuously scanned for vulnerabilities, and these vulnerable dependencies should be upgraded as soon as possible. Dependency locking and integrity checks are also a great way to ensure that you're downloading the package that you want. If the version number is specified, there is no ambiguity in what package is going to be downloaded. Additionally, if you specify the hash of the package that is expected to be downloaded, you will never end up downloading code that you do not want. While thinking of these mitigations for dependency confusion, I realized that there are various challenges involved. Different languages means that different package managers are involved, and each of these package managers behave differently. So it's challenging to understand how to deploy mitigations for each. Different languages also means that the indexes that host these packages have different rules. For example, Python's PyPy, which is the Python Public Package Index, has no scopes, whereas NPM has registered scopes. So the scoping solution that works for NPM does not work for Python. For Python, we specifically use naming conventions. JFrog released a new secure flag called Priority Resolution, which helps ensure that internal package requests are never routed to external indexes. However, when introducing and enabling these flags, or any other security defaults for that matter, a very careful and phased rollout is needed to prevent a bad change from affecting various builds throughout the entire organization. The mitigations and challenges I mentioned are pretty restricted to dependency confusion. As shown in this image is also present in Alex's dependency confusion article. There are numerous ways to conduct a supply chain attack. I have annotated the diagram to show some of the attacks that we talked about earlier, and each are present in a different part of the tree. Now, as you can see, the web browserify attack leverages the existence of a similar named package, so it is somewhat of a typo squatting attack. On the other hand, the CodeCov incident required changing the bash uploader script in an alternate GCS service, so it's on the other end of the tree. Given how prevalent and crippling these attacks have been recently, why haven't we solved supply chain attacks yet? Why is it so difficult to mitigate supply chain attacks? First, like the image that I showed on the previous slide, the attack surface is just too big. Companies use thousands of packages, different CI/CD systems, different vendors. Open source libraries that we use can sometimes become ownerless. Malicious code can bypass commit reviews. A lot is possible. Secondly, there is no one-size-fits-all solution. Solutions for dependency confusion do not mitigate typo squatting issues. We need to mitigate supply chain from all ends. What I believe is extremely helpful is industry-wide collaboration. One organization cannot solve supply chain issues alone. If an organization comes up with new practices, it's always a good idea to share this information far and wide. And the reason that we need to take these supply chain attacks seriously is because these attacks have a massive impact on customer trust. If a customer's data is breached, they're not going to care about which vulnerability in which third-party dependency caused the breach. If we're using third-party code, it becomes our responsibility to ensure that it remains trusted. This presentation was a quick sneak peek into the world of supply chain attacks. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
All right, well, that wraps up our last session of the day here from Ria. And now we will actually, like we mentioned, do a little bit of question and answer. So, yes, there you are, Ria. Thank you for joining. I have a couple questions queued up for you here. We'll just go ahead and jump right in. So out of, I know you gave a number of example supply chain attacks. Are there any of those that you found like especially interesting or even terrifying, I might say? And of that, like what did you or Atlassian learn from it?
I think the one that I found particularly terrifying was SolarWinds. That was probably one of the most impactful attacks. And I know that even my parents who don't usually, who aren't interested in security as much, they also paid attention to it, especially because it also affected the US government. So that's when supply chain became a big deal. And recently I've been noticing that a lot of companies have also started having particular supply chain security engineers to mitigate these issues because it's become such a big deal after that attack. So I think that one was particularly terrifying.
Excellent. And I think I kind of have a follow-up question on that. So I definitely agree. I think many of us, even in cybersecurity, they may not have been familiar with even the term cybersecurity supply chain until CyberWinds hit. It became top of mind for many of us then. So let's say I'm in the position, maybe I'm getting started, or maybe I'm in an organization now. Through the things we see in the news and from sessions like yours, we've become educated about the risks and the challenges that we have. What are some of the next steps in tackling these changes?
I think the first part would be to understand how your organization handles supply chain. So like, what sort of packages do you have? Do you have any internal packages within your organization? Because if you don't, then you might not have to worry about issues like dependency confusion. So I think the context matters a lot, wherein you need to know how your organization works in order to understand what sort of mitigations you need to apply. Like I said, the attack surface is so big that you need to identify where your organization falls within that tree so that you know how to mitigate it from what end.
Absolutely. I'm reminded I had a conversation with someone once who was at a certain higher level in the organization who claimed they didn't use open source software. And of course, they weren't vulnerable to this, but little did they know how much they actually used. And I'm sure, like you said, the attack surface is quite large.
Yeah.
So with that, Ria, I seem to have used up my list of questions here, and I'm not seeing anything jump out at me in the chat at the moment. So I think that's a wrap for QA, and also that's a wrap from our last session here of the conference. So Ria, thanks again for coming today.
Thanks, Lee.
And with that, we've come to the end of the conference, but we're not done yet. We do have a few closing remarks. So I'm actually going to hand it off to one of our great conference organizers here. So Purana, I'm just going to hand it on over to you, and why don't you take this thing home?
Sure. Thank you so much, Lee. Hi, everyone. My name is Prerna Shenoy. I'm a product security engineer here at Atlassian. It's my pleasure to announce that we've come to the end of Team SecCon 2021, and I hope you all enjoyed the talks and the panel and all the other parts of the conference as much as we all did. Our Team SecCon team has been hard at work putting this conference together, and I could not be more excited that we could present this to you all today. I hope that you were all able to gain something from the conference and engage in some good conversation. I personally really appreciated that the panelists and speakers dropped resources in the Slack workspace. I'm definitely going to take a look at that later. Thank you so much for doing that. As we mentioned earlier, as your gift for attending, you were able to donate to one of 3 awesome nonprofits that pay it forward for education in underrepresented communities. To repeat what the 3 were, it was Digital Nest, Missing School, and the Malala Fund. So I'm going to drop a couple numbers here just to summarize what the donations are going to look like based on how you guys voted. And 23% of the votes went to Digital Nest and were able to donate $2,875. With 46% of the votes were able to donate $5,750 to Missing School. And finally, with 31% of the votes, will be donating $3,875 to the Malala Fund. So thank you again to everyone for your participation and for paying it forward. On top of that, the speakers and panelists will be able to donate an extra amount each to the charity of their choice. So thank you again to everyone. Just a couple reminders to close this out, but we have a Capture the Flag challenge going on, as we mentioned earlier. And as of this point, it'll be open for around 21 hours or so. And we do have prizes. So for anyone who participates and attempts at least one challenge, you'll be entered automatically into the raffle for prizes. So be sure to do that. Something that we've noticed is the email verification might be going to your spam. So make sure you check there if you're having trouble with registration. And if you get stuck or need a hint, we have some awesome volunteers in the Help CTF channel in Slack that are happy to help. I want to end by thanking our amazing speakers and panelists today. So thank you so much, Shri, Adrian, Jody, Florian, Ria, Shamaine, Julia, Michelle, and Ben. We are so grateful for your time and your amazing insights on cloud security and your unique journeys. Thank you also to our moderators, Lee and Alice, for facilitating some great discussion. I really love the energy throughout all of this. A huge thank you to our core planning team for their work on this conference. This conference has taken months to plan out, and we could not have done it without the help of each and every person on our core team. And once again, thank you to all of our volunteers that are helping moderate the Capture the Flag today. Thank you to all of you, all of the attendees, for coming out today and participating in our event. We really hope you had a great time. And if for some reason you were not able to attend a session that you wanted to, do not worry, because the whole conference is recorded and will be posted on the website fairly soon. Last but not least, look out for a survey in your inbox in the next couple of days so that we can collect some feedback about Team SecCon 2021. And if you have any further questions about the CTF, any of the talks or panel discussions, or even Atlassian careers, please head on over to the Slack workspace, and we have a channel for each of those things that you can ask questions in. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your day or night, depending on where you are. Bye, everybody.